Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. As usual, I always have a special guest. I have the best guests in the world. I'm definitely in full belief of that. Maybe it's disillusion. I don't know. But today I'm joined by LeRon Harrison, and he is currently at Murray State University, the Global Languages and Theater Arts faculty member. He does lots of research on Japanese court poetry, and one of my favorite things in the world is Gagaku music. So thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to talk about Gagaku.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start. Let's take it back. How Japanese? You speak. I know you speak amazing Japanese. How did it all happen?
As I get this question asked a whole lot of times, so I have to do the standard pitch. Do you want the short answer or do you want the long answer?
I want the long answer.
The long answer then.
Because now in the future, when someone asks you this, you can just say, "Well, I did this interview."
All right, so the long answer is my first contact with Japanese, with anything Japanese, was in junior high school. That was, the mid 80s. So that was when the first anime boom was starting. So that was when Robotech was on TV. So that was kind of the first kind of introduction to it. There was the whole emerging, anime subculture, the tapes, the VCR tapes being spread around. And that's how I started watching it. And then being in Los Angeles at the time, you had the ability to kind of watch Japanese programs on the weekends on KBOC Channel 56 and KCSI Channel 18. So I was watching that, and it was just like, wouldn't it be nice if I could watch these without looking at the subtitles? And then graduated from high school, or graduated from junior high school and went to high school at Nathaniel Narbonne High School in Lomita, California. And lo and behold, they had a Japanese class. And so I was like, all right, you said it wouldn't be nice if you could watch these things without subtitles. And all right, so I went and took Japanese class. And, I guess the rest you could say is history. At the end of my first year, I got the chance to go to Japan as part of the Los Angeles Nagoya Sister City Exchange affiliation. And, I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, that's great. And now this is a really important question as well. And I think this is what I get asked all the time as a musician is, when did you decide this is what I want to make my career about? Is Japanese history, Japanese poetry, and Gagaku music. When did that finally go, this is it, this is me, this is my topic right here?
Probably senior year at UC Berkeley. People were saying, oh, you're studying Japanese, why don't you go international business, international law, right, do something like that. And I was like, I just like studying Japanese, and I could see myself just being a scholar of Japanese. And that was, I think, where the decision was made, and to pursue it in graduate school.
Awesome. So I wanted to ask, we're going to get into Gagaku and we're going to geek out for a long time on it. But I want to ask, so you're at the Murray State University currently still. And what are some of your responsibilities there? Like, what type of classes are you teaching?
I teach second year and fourth year Japanese, and I usually teach a fourth year course. Usually right now we're reading Japanese essays. Next semester it'll be Japanese literature. So those are the classes that I teach. I've taught a survey of modern Japanese literature in English. I wanted to do the pre-modern part of it, but the scheduling kind of wound up not being able to teach that. So
great. Okay, so we're going into my favorite thing in the world, Gagaku. It's outside of Shakuhachi, of course. So where was the first place that you heard Gagaku music and picked up one of the instruments?
So have to make the distinction, right? The first time I heard Gagaku music was when I was at UC Berkeley. My years there, I was always buying kind of Japanese music. So Shakuhachi, Koto, Gagaku was amongst the things I was purchasing. So I heard it as an undergrad at Berkeley. Didn't actually encounter it, didn't actually get the chance to play it until as a PhD student at UC Irvine. And
Mhm.
that's when I saw an article in a Japanese cultural newspaper about a performance and contacted the author. And the author was like, "Oh, we're practicing, over here at the Tenry Church in LA. Come out." And so that was the first time I actually got to play, and that was in 2003. So
Mhm. And so recently, you actually helped me a little bit. I'm working on a video project with somebody else to do a basic intro of Gagaku music. For somebody who's never heard of Gagaku before, what would be the easiest way to describe it in like under 30 seconds? So I think it's like an impossible task.
yeah.
I don't think you can do it. But I mean, if you were gonna say, you're having a beer with somebody and you say, "Oh, I study Gagaku music." Oh, what's that?
It's Japanese imperial court music. That's always the simple way I put it. It's Japanese imperial court music.
And then the people just go, so it's like what? So
Like it's like nothing that
yeah,
you've
there's,
ever before. There's no comparison.
yeah, and that's what when I do talk to people about other types of Japanese music, that's what I say too, is that there is no other music that can even surmount to the aesthetic quality that it has. So, well, let's get into it a little bit. So let's talk more about the orchestra and the musical side of it. You actually play the hichiriki. Can you introduce your instrument and what its what its role is? And
So the hichiriki is often described as the lead instrument, right? It carries the main melody.
Mhm,
So that's the role that that role of playing the lead melody.
mhm. And then, so some of the other instruments. So the hichiriki is more like an. If we were to compare it to anything else, it's a double reed instrument. So it's kind of like an oboe, but
Yeah,
for me, it has a little bit more depth. Like it has like the graininess of an oboe, but it has the depth of a saxophone, which makes it
yeah,
quite unique in
yeah.
its production. Now, do you happen to have one with you that's
Let's see.
because I think it's really surprising to just see the instrument and how small it is. You
Let's see.
we
It's a nice, pretty one out. So
yeah, it's super small, right? It's just
yeah.
like little thing, but it has one of the largest sounds in the
Yes.
ensemble, which is what is really great. So
Yeah.
now, so one of the other instruments. So let's go through a couple other ones that are in the same family. And so, what about the ryuteki?
The the ryuteki is usually the first instrument that you will always hear
Hmm.
the kind of lead part, and then all the rest of the instruments join in after it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
And then outside the ryuteki, we also have the sho.
yes.
And what is the show's role in
Particularly, the show is the one I think when people hear it, they have the most fascination about it.
yes, I agree. And when I think show, if I'm trying to describe it to people, what I think of it is as it's kind of like the ocean of sound, the ocean of harmony that fills the hall.
Yeah. So the way people describe it in Gagaku is that the hijiriki is playing the melody,
Hmm.
playing the equivalent in its own way. The ryuteki kind of has more range than the hijiriki because it has two octaves. So it will play the kind of accompanying melody with kind of more range about it, kind of playing the cluster of notes that kind of harmonize with it. So yeah, it's filling in the sound, and particularly when both the ryuteki and the hichiriki take breaths, the show is there kind of filling that empty space with the sound.
Hmm. Oh, it says my connection is unstable. Let's see one thing. I'm gonna try here really quickly. This might, well, we'll keep this in, of course, but All right. It looks like everything's still fine. No
Okay.
problems. Okay. Yeah, it just like popped up like saying you have a bad connection. Anywho, so those are most of the wind instruments. Now, at the same time, there's also a percussive element and a string element. So the one of my other favorite instruments is the biwa,
Hmm.
and so but the biwa and the koto, the sho no koto, seem to be working together in the ensemble and kind of for doing the same role. Can you talk a little bit about those two instruments in brief?
So those two are sitting kind of in between the melody and the percussion. So
Mm,
they will play at the one, and they're kind of playing arpeggio. So they're again kind of doing what the show does, is kind of playing the abstracted kind of the harmonic notes that go with what the Ryuteki and the Hichiriki are doing, and they're playing them at particular points in the music that sync up with the percussion. So wind kind of sets the melody, strings are kind of the accompaniment and the bridge between melody and then percussion kind of lays the rhythm out.
mhm. And now the percussion is actually quite extensive as well. They have the taiko, the kotozumi, and there are sometimes are gongs involved. But what I think that gets can get really confusing for people when they first hear about Gagaku is that there are multiple different types of Gagaku and some forms of Gagaku that are no longer played, which means some instruments are no longer used, like the Shakuhachi. And I think that we need to, I need to write a treaty that says that the Shakuhachi must be returned to the Gagaku Orchestra and submit that to the emperor for his review.
I don't know how my teacher and the other court musician would feel about that. I have to that. But I do appreciate that, and it's something that I've always been interested in, and just wanted to know that it was there. And part of my research seems to be saying, even in the 15th century, people were writing, Gagaku scholars or Gagaku musicians were writing about the shakuhachi.
Mhm,
So it seems to have had some role in it. So it's like, okay, there has to be, uh, if that's there, we should have a good connection to kind of reestablish a place
mhm.
for the shakuhachi if it wants to take it back.
Now, so this I have one shakuhachi out here right now. This is actually from 1700, so this is quite old, and it really is 300 years old. The fact that it's still in the condition that it's in is unbelievable. But even this is much different than what the Gagaku shakuhachi at that time would have been. It would actually have been much shorter, something around this length.
Yeah.
Now, from what my research is, and this is actually very interesting, and so this is where the nerding part of us is coming out. Um, that version of the instrument was actually extraordinarily difficult to play. And so I've played Hito Yogiri, which is the predecessor to Shakuhachi, which is already very difficult. And I think that the reason why they got rid of it, and it's not because it wasn't popular. There's myths and writings that even Murasaki Shikibu herself was playing the Hito Yogiri as for a pastime, or sorry, Gagaku Shakuhachi as a pastime. I think that the instrument was just so impractical, and it was very difficult to tune, and, not like any of the other instruments are easy to tune, but even more so, and then they already had the Ryuteki, which had a similar aesthetic sound, so they just said, "Well, which one are we gonna get rid of? The one that's hard to play or the one that's really hard to play?" I vote the one that's really hard to play.
Yeah, I mean that sounds right. I mean, Gagaku when it came over, all these instruments came over from China, and China could play because that was the whole sense of you go out and kind of collect people's musics and songs, and that makes them a tributary state to them. And so they had all the different ensembles of the different regions. So it was no problem for the Tang Dynasty to kind of put together these ensembles of the different regions that were tributary to them. All that gets taken over into Japan, and it's like, okay, historically, they're like, okay, this temple in Nara will have this type of music, and this temple in Nara will have this type of music. And you kind of had that in the Nara period, but when you move the capital to Heian, it's all in the body of the court musicians, and the court musicians kind of have to be like, and the nobles who are kind of playing have to be like, okay, well, we can't play all this music, so we just have to make some choices about what do we feel comfortable playing with. And
Hmm.
that's probably what happened, is a sense of, okay, we feel comfortable playing the yuteki, we don't feel comfortable playing this instrument, and so let's just not play it, and let's just go with the hitchiki and the yuteki and the show, and be done with it.
You know, what's really surprising about this, and I think a lot of people don't know this either, but I think that because it was actually removed from the ensemble, that it kind of lost its prestige, and therefore it was actually allowed to be played by regular people. And Gagaku, especially in the Heian period, and please correct me anytime I'm wrong. If you were a peasant, you could only hear about it. You could never actually listen to it. Couldn't see it. Could not attending is be that's unheard of a peasant. It was only for the nobles, which is 0.1% of that time and population.
It's just more, we just don't know. I
Mhm.
mean, all that we know about the Heian period is written from the nobles' perspective. We don't really know. We get a sense, some of the kind of later stories, like in the Kokon Chomonji, which is 13th century, says that you have these kind of people who are going off. You have nobles that were kind of exiled off, or were governors of certain provinces, and they took these instruments and played them. So it might be that people who weren't nobles, the people who were out in the remote provinces, heard it that way.
Mhm.
But the answer is, we just don't know, because the nobles just kind of are writing from their perspective, and they're just like, okay, well, all the other nobles know this stuff, and
Yeah, like what's
this
the
is
point of
what.
writing about something that already everybody already knows? And so it's yeah, this is part of history. Like Sengoku, I feel is a lot easier to approach in general. There's a lot more written about because there's a lot more wars and you know people are fighting over territory. But Heian, Nara, Yayoi, it is so difficult to even get a sense of how things worked. And I have tons of books in here where I'm reading all these, you know, stories about Heian, and every single sentence has an asterisk right after it saying, but it could have been the exact opposite. And then they make another statement, but it could have been the exact opposite. And this time period, we get a view of is kind of like the aristocratic elegance of poetic writing, food, like the most luxurious lifestyle you can imagine, and that's all we get to see, and that's 0.1% of Japanese people at that time.
Yeah, I mean, you get the rare, since you brought it up in the video, say Shonogon kind of has the one moment where she's going out into the countryside and kind of runs into some common people, and they're just like, they talk different from us. What are they saying? And you get that, just that brief instance of it, and it's like, from a literary perspective, it's like, okay, that's all you're gonna get, because
Yeah,
it's
that's
like, they're kind of not like us, and can we get out of here real quick? So
yeah, I think I've read some of that stuff where they're like basically like they're dirty barbarians, like really, really like nasty language. And and that's kind of about it. And then that's all they get. And then it's like that was the only time I've ever had to come face to face with those people. And
mhm,
I don't even think that in this way they even didn't even no, they didn't say people. They said those animals. They did not regard them as people. That I'm now it's coming back to me. So it really was like that part of Japan was so small, and we can't really even say that that's Japanese. I suppose, like, yes, it's Japanese, but in the broader picture of it, it's not the 99.9% of what Japan at that time was.
yeah.
So in Gagaku, um, let's talk about one of like the styles. So like maybe like let's talk about kayo and what that word means and what the purpose of that ensemble music is.
It's called kayo. Some people, I think nowadays it gets that term kayo. The other way to kind of read it is utaimono. So these are kind of the songs that were sung. And so it's not just nobles were sitting there just playing the instruments, they were also singing. So a lot of, and this is something that my advisor on poetry, who's now retired, kind of raised the question, the last few years I was around him, is he's like, okay, we're used to reading poetry. We're used to seeing poetry on a page, either in Japanese or in English, but it may not have been a poem until it was sung, until it was recited, until it was vocalized. And
Mm,
so you have to start to think about the vocalization aspect of it. And I think that's where kind of the utaimono genre comes out of, is the sense of you had Chinese poetry that was recited. You had Waka poetry, the imperial court poetry, seems to have been recited a number of times. And so that recitation, that singing of it, along with Saibara and Roe and all these songs were there. And again, that's the word for poetry is equally the word for song. It's uta, right? So
mhm,
uta is poetry, uta is song. So this sense of poetry as having this kind of musical connection, and that it just to the court nobles, it just seemed naturally to put the instruments that they were playing behind it and sing it out.
mhm, mhm. Now, when they're doing utaimono, does it serve a specific purpose? Because Gagaku, there are some times that it's ceremonial, related to the Shinto religion and Shinto practices. Um, and it's, you know, I think, saying that it's an orchestra is a really good uh, analogy, because the orchestra serves many purposes in many different cases in the West.
Mhm.
But to try to get, I want people, as they're, versus the small 10-minute video versus this much longer interview, I really want people to get the fact that Gagaku is this multi-purpose thing, that it's party music,
Yes.
it is serious lecture recitation of poem, it's Shinto religious practice, and it's just your Tuesday night music.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right, because it served all those purposes. And part of the history of it is that what was brought over from China and what the people needed to go over to China to get was the banquet music, right? The
Mhm,
ritual music was kagura, right? So they already had their own indigenous music. So they weren't going to China to learn ritual music, the yagüe in Chinese, right? The ritual court music that was following Confucian rules and the Chinese imperial court. They were like, we've got that. We've got kagura. So kagura, with its music and its songs, were there to kind of serve as the entertainment for the gods. What we need is the banquet music, right? We need the music for when we're having these banquets, and what's the music to kind of keep everybody happy and well fed and well entertained. And that's what they brought from China. And that's what largely gets put in the category of Gagaku. But what you're kind of pointing out is that, yes, Gagaku does include that Kagura because, right, the court musicians had to be able to play the Kagura music for the various rituals that the court required, as much as they had to play the entertainment music that were there for the various kind of banquets that needed to be there. And equally, when they're kind of doing celebrations, right? When you kind of have things like the Aoi Matsuri, the Hollyhock Festival in May, right? And you have the horse races, right, that are divided into left and right? You've got to play the music of which side wins. So if the left wins, right, the music of the left has to be played. If the right wins, the music of the right has to be played.
mhm.
So in those kind of competitive situations, you have to be able to play that. And then it's just simply, as you kind of get in the literature so many times, it's just, okay, somebody's just playing there, they're just sitting at home and they just have nothing to do. grab the ryuteki, grab the sonokoto, grab the biwa, and start playing. And then it's like, oh well, so and so's playing that, and you know what? I happen to have my ryuteki with me, and let's start playing.
Old school jam session.
Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned music of the left and music of the right, and you're referring to is the togaku and the
Komagaku.
komagaku. Yes, so music of China and music of Korea. And now, is there a reason why? So, and you mentioned that these horse races, which horse racing and horses in Japan is huge and still is today.
Yeah.
Why would one side be at the horse racing? What designates a left side and a right side? Is it just because they are on the left side and they're on the right side and they're using that kind of wordplay?
I mean, it's just divided into two sides, right? It's just strictly wherever the middle is, and whoever is kind of sitting in the seat of designation, right? That person's left is the left side, and that person's right is the right side, and so they're just divided into those two groups. And it's true, particularly in my research, of poetry matches, right? Is divided that same way. The two sides are divided into the left and the right. And if it's a really elaborate ones, you would do this, right? After telling who the wins and losses, right? If the side of the left won, then right, to celebrate, left music is played, right? If the right side wins, then music of the right is played. So it was, again, kind of the celebration aspect of it, right? Once the competition part has been done, right, whichever side wins, their music kind of gets played.
I kind of want to go into a little bit of like this, like some of the serious music and also some of the joyous music, and talk a little bit about the differences. So let's talk about one, if you can name one really, really serious kagura piece.
Probably, I mean, a lot of any kagura piece is serious. So anytime you're doing kagura, it's kind of serious because it's always a ritual. So the one that I'm most familiar with is Urayasu no Nai, right, which is a more recent kagura piece based off of the poem that the Showa emperor composed. But even there, in the times that I've had to sing it, it's always been done in, whether it's been for a concert or whether we've actually done it for an actual Shinto ritual, it's always been kind of taken seriously.
Now, when you say serious, how does it differ from the regular just your every Tuesday night music versus this special? What can we hear and what can we see that's different?
Wow, that's a good question, because when you put it that way, it's like, on some levels, it's not so serious. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not so serious. It's like they are the same. I think it's just more the setting that really makes it serious. Because definitely when I performed it as part of a ritual, it's the ritual aspect of it that I'm in the shrine, kind of singing off to the side, and right, this ritual, the priest is kind of doing this part of the ritual, and this is why it's being done. So I think it's more the situation that brings in the seriousness. So yeah, when I think about it in that terms, it's like, yeah, definitely when I was sitting there performing it in the ritual sense, in the actual part of the shrine and the ritual, and sitting there as part of this rite that's going on, that's where it's serious. But when it's done in kind of the concert setting, it has the same sort of seriousness as all of the pieces, right? So we want to make sure these pieces are done correctly. We don't want any mistakes, or we want as few mistakes as possible. And so in that sense, you're taking it serious because the performance aspect of it demands that you take it seriously. So yeah, it's a good point to bring up, that the seriousness of when it's being done as ritual versus the seriousness of when it's being done as part of a performance.
So it's mostly just fuinki, the atmospheric, how it feels. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's really important as well to, because in Shakuhachi music we have very serious pieces and then we have not so serious pieces, and they do sound very different as well, and also the setting and where you would play them is also very different. The other thing I'm also thinking about is, and I have like the problem with something like talking about Gagaku, and especially for a person like me, is that 20,000 things will hit my mind at the same time of questions I want to ask, and I have no idea which order, so I'm just going to start asking them. um, the I want to talk about the bigaku, the actual aesthetics of Gagaku music, because there really are very, very old ideas in there, and not just the basic ones. I mean, of course, there is wabi sabi, there is mono no aware, there is ma, but I'm even thinking deeper. Like there is a kind of sense of shibui in there. There is a feeling of iki, and there's also even a feeling of yugen at the same time. And if I guess what I'm asking you is, what are some of the aesthetics that Gagaku is trying to, what are they trying to show the audience member, and which we'll start with that.
All right. I would push back and try to say, leave all of those concepts out, right?
Mhm.
Never bring ma. Let's just kind of leave those aside. Let me just kind of take it from the perspective of when I'm actually kind of in an ensemble and what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
In that sense, and it's become better as I've gotten longer in performing, and I can actually start to hear the Ryuteki and what it's doing, and the show and what it's doing. As I can say, when I was first starting out, it was just mainly Hichiriki. But I think now that I'm this deep into practicing, when I play, I can hear the Ryuteki and definitely try and be like, okay, I need to, the Ryuteki is at this pitch, and I need to kind of make my pitches maybe a little bit. I'm a little sharp, and I need to lower the pitches and that sort of things. So I think if we were talking about Bigaku in that sense, the the one concept that I think that even still comes out now, I think the terms that from Gagaku that have come out in just in use in Japanese are right uchiawase and
Mm.
choshi. Right,
Mm.
those are things that originated from Gagaku, and the sense of uchiawase of right trying to make sure that everything fits together, right?
Mm.
Trying to make sure that right the Ryuteki and the Hichiki are in the same pitch and kind of playing in their own way, but yet together. And that the
Mhm.
show is kind of doing its part, but yet coming together. That all of these distinct pieces come together, and that they are in the same choshi, right? That sense of right, we have tuned together, and we are working together as a unit. So I think that would be the big aesthetic thing that I would take away, that sense of you have these 8 different instruments that are doing distinct things, but the overall purpose is to make sure that they all come together and it is one unit.
Mm. Mm. Now, there's another part of Gagaku that I wanted to dive into a little bit, and which is the bunraku in the actual
The Buddha.
dancing. Yeah. Oh yeah, bugaku. Sorry, bunraku is something else. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
Um, so bugaku um, is not during the entire performance, and sometimes it's not even done in a performance, from what I understand. What is bugaku?
So Bugaku are the dance pieces.
Mhm.
So yeah, it depends on whether you have some ensembles don't have the capability to do the dances, right? It's either they have no one that has learned the dances, they may have someone that's learned the dances, but they don't have the costumes, right? So
Mhm.
for various reasons, Bugaku is may not be in a ensemble's repertoire. Ideally, any Gagaku performance, and particularly if you're in Japan, any Gagaku performance that you will see will usually involve kangen, it will involve instrumental, utaimono, and it will be Bugaku. right? So you would usually have those three. So, and the ones that kind of do this on a regular, the ensembles that do it on a regular will always do those three.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a part of it, right? Again, when we kind of go back to the Heian period, it was a sense of these were more, Bugaku was really part of the ceremonial, not the ceremonial part, but the big banquets, right? The big banquets, the elaborate banquets would have these dances in it. It just wouldn't be kind of instrumental music. You would have the actual dances. So going back to kind of the Ali Matsuri and the horse races, it wouldn't just be the music of the left or the music of the right. It would be the dances of the left and the dances of the right. So you would have the winning side kind of have these dances as part of the celebration. So that's part of where it comes from, is the sense of it can be divorced, because you can say, well, these dances weren't always done every day. They were really
Mm-hmm.
done for these big elaborate parties that the nobles were having.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we
Which
just,
might have been every day.
yeah, you could have it every day, right? And again, because you'd have to wrangle up the people to do that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they'd have to practice before they kind of get there. So that's what kind of leads to, no, you can't do this every day, because so
Yeah.
and so's got to practice Namdio before he gets up there and dance. Because if he
Mm-hmm.
gets up there and dances Namdio and it looks bad, people are gonna be like, oh, that was a sad Namdio, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about it for days. So
Yeah, because there's not really much else to talk about when you're.
yeah. So it's in that sense. So it's out of that that some groups don't necessarily do Bugaku and some groups do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all really fascinating because it's such a huge world that many people don't know even exist. That is has so many levels to it. So many levels.
Yeah.
There was another question I was going to ask you about, and this is one that always gets asked, and I think it's kind of like I don't want to say it's a cheap answer, or sorry, a cheap question. Like it's like I got you sort of thing, because I don't think it has that sort of power whatsoever. Keeping up tradition is always something that we talk about in music, and but no matter what we do, no matter the student of the teacher is going to play differently. They're going to interpret things differently, and over time it's going to have an effect. So even Gagaku music played in the 1500s, or let's say 1600s, the people from 1100s would say, oh, this is not Gagaku, this is so different, because it's changed so much over the times. How today do we keep that tradition, and how do we know this is kind of how it might have been played, but this is how we're playing it now because of reasons XYZ?
The large thing is the tempo, right? The large thing about Gagaku that has changed, that as a musicologist and who work on Gagaku will say, is that the tempo has changed. And it
Mm.
makes sense, because when you were playing it in the Heian period, you had all this time. So they're like, the pieces were slower, much slower, and dragged on. Well, to our sense, they would have dragged on. But to the noble person who just had all the time in the world, right? It was supposed to carry that sense of, right, this can go on forever and ever and ever. And it seems like once it starts to spread outside of the court, once kind of the nobles taught it to the samurai in the Kamakura period, and when the Ashikaga shoguns kind of were taking up Sho and teaching it back to the emperor in the Muromachi period, right? The tempo has been gradually getting faster, right? So and again, it's the sense of it's no longer confined to the court, so you can't sit there and play it forever and ever. People do have lives that they have to live to,
Yep.
and they can't be listening to this music like nobles would. So the tempo has definitely gotten faster. And so, yeah, if you were able to kind of summon a person from the Heian period and they were to hear even just a basic piece like Eten Rapu, they'd be like, that's fast.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to go back to that? It's like, I don't think we can, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we can go back to kind of these pieces. And for my friends who have actually played those kind of nobegaku pieces that have that kind of long drawn out pieces, they're like, kitsui, kitsui, kitsui. It's hard to do that because you kind of hold this thing for this long, long time. It's like it's just hard to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can kind of go back to trying to recreate that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the way I kind of approach it, and I write about this in my scholarship, is it's better not to try to think about it in tradition, but to better to think of it as a practice, right? And we look at the history of the practice of
Mm-hmm.
Gagaku. And we recognize that, yes, the practice of Gagaku in the Heian period was to play long and slow, and that the practice of Gagaku in the 21st century is to play at a faster tempo, right? And so practices kind of go through these changes over time because people come in, because people kind of have to change the nature of the practice. They have to change, what they feel is right or wrong about the practice. They have to kind of change the roles because, right, we've gone from being a music confined to just nobility to a music that is now being played by samurai, that in the Edo period is now being played by common people, and now in the 21st century is being played by not just Japanese, but non-Japanese people like myself. So you have to make these changes over time because that's just the nature of history and that's just the nature of the practice in history.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I agree with that 100%. The other thing about the like historical tradition, yeah, I think that your answer was good. There is nothing else that needs to be added there. I'm happy with that answer completely. um I want to. I think the only follow up question I have about that would be, when we say practice, are you saying like it's kind of like a do, like a michi, that a way to following? So it's like almost like the way of Gagaku, or is it just or is it not related to that sort of Buddhist idea?
When I use practice, I'm using a very defined a philosophical term from Todd May, and his great book, Our Practices Ourselves, has kind of it's one of these accessible philosophical books written in a way that anybody can pick it up and understand what he's talking about. And he
Mhm.
defines a practice as regularity or regularities of behavior that are usually goal directed, that are socially and normatively governed.
Mhm.
To break the concepts down, regularity of behavior, right? Things that you do on the regular basis.
Mhm.
So, in that sense, I'm definitely not going for the kind of Buddhist, mysterious, esoteric type situation. It's like I'm seeing this as something that you do on a regular basis. So, this is part of your everyday life. Is that you're going
Mhm.
to be playing Gagaku on a regular basis, like you play Shakuhachi on a regular basis, or someone else plays Koto on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So it's usually goal directed, which means you're probably doing it for some purpose, right? And
Mhm.
with any sort of music, the idea is that you're going to perform it, right? It's not just simply that you're just practicing it in your own home and never to put it out there. You do want to kind of put it out there for people to kind of hear, whether they understand it or not. Especially
Mhm.
with something like that, because they probably won't get it the first time around.
Oh,
But
of
it's
course
still
not.
the desire to kind of put it out there to perform it, right? Social governance meaning that it has roles, and so it's a sense of whether you're playing the ryuteki, the hichiriki, the sho, the biwa, the sonokoto, whatever instrument. If you're singing, if you're dancing, right, there's a role, and you're supposed to be doing a certain thing in that role. And then normative governance means it has rights or wrong, right? So there's a right way to play a ryuteki, there's a wrong way to play a ryuteki. There's a right way to sing, there's a wrong way to sing. There's a right way to dance, there's a wrong way to dance. And so that's what I mean by practice. So I don't really kind of see it as the do, the michi,
Mhm.
as this kind of
Mhm.
esoteric path that leads you to it. I'm saying it's you get into it because it's something that you want to be a part of your life from this point on till most likely till the day you die. That
Yeah.
and in being something like that, it's just not. It's never going to have that mystical aspect to you. It's going to be basically a part of who you are.
And I think a lot of us, when we hear, like, especially when I heard Gagaku for the first time, it did have a mystical element, but that did go away, and instead, because the reason why it was mystical is because I didn't realize that what was mystical about it was the fact of how refined it was. And then this might get me in trouble from shakuhachi players, but oh well. Shakuhachi is not refined like that. There are some music that are, like sangkyoku especially is very refined, and there is a way to do it and how to do it. But when I'm thinking of this koden hongkyoku music that is, from the temple, it is an expression of yourself. It is zen in the idea that you are taking the energy that is in you at that moment and creating whatever is going to come out of the barrel of this flute. So it's not like, here's a set rule of how this piece has to be played. Every time you play this piece, it's going to be very different, because you're trying to express your current mode of thought, the energy, like tired versus, happy versus angry and whatever. It's much more individualistic and about yourself, which is much different than the uchiawase, when you're kind of working with everybody else's energy and trying to meld together and refine it. And where in shakuhachi, there is much more of kind of like this basara sort of idea of just going out of the way to do something kind of brash, because in your mind right now there is stuff happening.
Mm, I think is again. I would just say that I wouldn't see again as from the practitioner's perspective. I never really see it as refined. I just see it
Hmm.
as again when I say ujiawase is the sense that right we're all just trying to come together and make sure right no one is trying to kind of so in the sense of that individualistic situation like we kind of all know what we can do and just try and put it in the right space so that it doesn't step on anybody else's toes.
Hmm.
So no one kind of is going too long, too short, right?
Hmm.
And that it's not difficult, right? We're trying to be mindful of the other players around us and what their roles are and trying to make that whole.
Hmm.
So and definitely I think that's the language like choshini noruna, right? Don't kind of think that because you got the joshi, you can just kind of ride it through. You have to kind of be mindful of that, and you can't really be aware of it. And I could say, definitely, I've been one performance that I remember is that I was playing shoko, so I was playing gong, not ichiriki, and the kakko player who was playing was really good. I'm getting really engrossed in how he's playing, and I'm kind of forgetting my role as the shoko
Hmm.
player with the strike. And it's like that's Choshi. That would probably be Choshi in order. It's like you kind of see somebody else's ability, and it's like, oh my goodness, they're good, and it's like, wait, I'm forgetting my own part in this.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
definitely that sense of trying to be like, okay, yes, he's a good couple player, but okay, I need to see where his skill is and kind of make that distinction so I can sit there and play Shoko in time with him.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Um, how long is an average Gagaku performance? So if somebody wanted to go see a show, whether it be in Japan or whether it be in Europe somewhere or even in the States, because we do have ensembles throughout the States that people should know about and look it up. You'd be surprised that there actually might be one. How long would a full Gagaku performance be?
So a full performance, meaning Kangen Utaimono Bugaku,
Correct.
probably is about an hour to an hour and a half.
So it's really not long. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's not that long. So, it's an hour to an hour and a half, usually with a break between the Kangen Utaimono and the Bugaku because the stage has to be set up differently.
yeah.
in the Kangen and the Daimono part, right, the ensemble is sitting in the space that becomes the area for the dancer to dance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's you have to take an intermission to kind of move the space, move the instruments off to the side to give the space to the dancer. So
Mm-hmm. And where would be the best place for people to find information about Gagaku? And like, let's say they want to go see an event. What would be the right, or the not the right, the best way to find some information?
that's hard
It's
to
it's a tough question. You know, it's
because it's as someone who's in the world, it's like you just got to know that. Oh yes, this group is playing and this group is playing and they're doing their concert this time. So you're in the know and you know you always hear from this side and that side that oh yeah. So yeah, it's always that's always the thing I do. Like think about the person who's not in the world. Think about the person who's coming into this
Mhm.
world. How do they kind of get that? And it really I mean, in Japan, it's just a matter of kind of going online. In the age of Google, you can kind of go online and kind of just go look at Gagaku and Gagaku performances and see what comes up. I would say
Mhm.
that's the best way to do it because a number of the major groups, Deigakusha, Nihon Gagakai, Gagaku Doyu Kai, Tenri Gagakai, do have, you know, pages, Facebook pages. So
And you know, it's also interesting is even when I was walking around in Seitegaya, there was actually a flyer about a Gagaku performance that was coming up the day after I had to leave. But
mm,
it is there more prevalent in Japan, of course, but even in the States, I think even by someone just saying, you know, going onto Google and typing in American Gagaku Orchestra and looking up those lists, and there are lots of resources online to connect, but you know, the hardest thing is that getting people to know about Gagaku in the first place. So that's why I did this. But I think the way that I want to close this is I want you to either tell me something about what is like some either something that you find incredibly interesting or surprising about Gagaku, or um, something along those lines. You know, a really interesting fact that people don't know, or a little tidbit of history that you found to be really quite surprising. Don't you love it when you get a question, you're like, I didn't prepare for this.
Never gave it any thought about what's kind of surprising about it. I think I think the thing that I would say what I always kind of grapple with is kind of what you've been raising and what you're trying to do is trying to put the knowledge out there. I think my scholastic work on Gagaku is part of this attempt to really put into English what's happening. And so it's the sense of, okay, why is it that we can have groups in America like the Columbia Ensemble in New York? We can have Kinara and Tindri, which I came out of in LA. We have the Northern California Gagaku group in NorCal, which I was, you know, part of when I was at Stanford, right? One of our members is now up in Seattle and starting up a group up there. So we got this space and we're kind of building the space out in America. And yet we're saying, hey, we're here, but you know, that response is coming back. So that's always the thing that kind of I'm always just kind of wondering and just kind of it's the big question to me is a sense of what can we do to make this music and this practice more accessible, more known in the larger society.
Mm, mm. And you know that is like the $1 million question. And I've I've done is I do lots of different things, of course, with working with other, you know, more prevalent YouTubers than myself, in interviewing people and creating. The thing that I've noticed the most that I think is lacking or this sort of thing, like this one-on-one interview in a long form, not like a TV interview where it's like 1 minute and it's so surface level that it doesn't provide enough meat to the sandwich. So I mean, you could have the best bread in the world, freshest lettuce, beautiful tomatoes, but if you got one little piece of roast beef, ain't nobody can eat that sandwich again, right? And that's what we're looking for. We need to have the full bulk of the sandwich. And I think that my hope is that this long form style interview is really going to get people to be like, okay, you know, I really find this quite actually interesting. And a lot of things these two gents are talking about, if we're astute enough to be gents, the that they'll go through and they'll start doing their own research and their own listening. And then it has a life outside of that. But on YouTube, I've looked for, people just talking about shakuhachi. Just anything, even just someone sitting there and just talk about it. There's like one guy who's in Japan who's just kind of like super, super amateur, doesn't know really anything about shakuhachi, just except for the things that he learns from his teacher. That's it. And I've really, really looked, and I'm not talking about an interview where someone's up there and they play for a little bit and say 5 words. I'm talking like 45 minutes to an hour and a half long interview, which is what people want. I mean, I mentioned this before to somebody else, like the Joe Rogan podcasts are like 4 hours long and people listen to 4 hours of it. They want in-depth detail and with these people, and they want to learn. And so hopefully this will be another way.
Yeah.
So I will definitely have you back, because we should do like Japanese language stuff too. That's a really tough one. And I think a lot of people also get people who are studying Japanese really have a hard time. They learn the language in a class setting, and then they
Mm.
go to Japan, or even they take the Nihon Doroku Shiken and they get N1. Then they go to Japan and they can't speak to anybody, because the written language and the spoken language are so different. So we should definitely get together again and hash out some Japanese stuff.
Okay.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end as well. I'm here with LeBron Harrison, and God, Gagaku, I'm all about it.
We need to do something together.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, I'll see you next week.